Today we've got the candidate for U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania, John Fetterman. Thanks so much for coming back on.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me back on.
So a lot's happened in the last few weeks as far as the Pennsylvania Senate race is concerned. On the right, the Trump-endorsed candidate, Sean Parnell, dropped out, and then Dr. Oz threw his hat into the ring as we just continue to descend deeper into lunacy. But actually, with that said, in light of the fact that a reality TV star went on to win in 2016, how seriously are you taking Dr. Oz's candidacy?
You really have to take it very seriously. I mean, he has a lot of resources and has high name ID. People know who he is and everything like that. So, I think it's a strange development. To use that meme, that wasn't on anyone's bingo card a few months ago that, a celebrity TV doctor was going to jump into the race. But American politics these days has, in my opinion, an increasingly larger element of that to it. And so here we are. I don't think anyone's bingo card had that, but that's what's happened.
Well, in Dr. Oz's Senate announcement, beyond mentioning that he was running for the Pennsylvania Senate seat, he never actually mentions the state of Pennsylvania once. And that issue is exacerbated by the fact that the guy doesn't even live in Pennsylvania. He lives in New Jersey and he works in New York. Now, without shitting on New Jersey, because you and I have our differences of opinion as far as the great state of New Jersey is concerned.
I would never. I mean, it's my only issue with Jersey was their official account. They were trying to steal our cheesesteak, and then that started a whole different thing there. The NJ.gov tried to come for the cheesesteak, and I was like, I had to defend my state's honor here at that point.
It's understandable. In light of that he doesn't live in Pennsylvania, that he works in New York, that he lives in New Jersey. What are your thoughts on the fact that Republicans are offering up candidates to represent a state that they literally have nothing to do with?
I honestly, I haven't, and this is the honest truth. No one on our team has done a deep dive on his like specific residency or the statutorial requirements of what he made or meets or anything like that. It's like his announcement was his announcement, and ultimately it's going to be up to the primary voters for the Republicans to decide if Dr. Oz is their standard bearer and what have you. I think it just speaks to the surreal nature of where we are in this moment in time in American politics, I guess. And I think Pennsylvania is going to ultimately decide what it's looking for in their next United States senator, because this is obviously a crucial race. But it's just such a strange development, one that no one would have ever foreseen or taken notice of. But I don't know what his roots are in Pennsylvania or how extensive they are, but nevertheless, he's in, and I don't know what that'll bring in terms of what the Republican electorate's going to think of him, and it's interesting. I know.
Well, obviously Dr. Oz has kind of failed up on the right, given that as a doctor who's willing to promote right-wing talking points, he's proved useful for Republicans. And so they've propped him up as he's advocated for disproven COVID treatments and reopening schools, even if that meant we would lose 2 or 3% of people. And those are his words. What do you think that says about the danger of allowing the Senate, or the House, or the White House for that matter, to fall into Republican hands at this moment in particular?
I mean, it's a crucial race for that very simple fact. And I pride myself on believing in science. All of our children, we have a 7-year-old, we have a 10-year-old, and we have an 11-year-old. They're all vaccinated. Giselle and I are fully vaxxed, and we're both going to get our boosters. So we firmly believe in science, and we firmly believe in the reality of what we need to do in COVID. And I'm surprised or disappointed that some of the things that Dr. Oz has promoted with respects to COVID, it's not something I would have expected that a trained surgeon and doctor that he is would have said. And I haven't really focused much on what Dr. Oz has said in terms of COVID treatments. I focused on what we know is the general consensus is that it works, and vaccines have been incredibly effective. And we need to be vigilant, and we need to make sure we're taking the appropriate steps. And I don't think there's or should be much room for some strange interpretation of the reality here, because when we stop agreeing on what should be agreed upon, and the effectiveness of vaccinations has marked the upward surge of public health and child welfare and the welfare of all of us with vaccines that we've all received as children. I don't understand why, in a world that we live in today, that this was ever a debate to begin with, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, it's just another instance of the right turning things into culture war issues that don't deserve to be turned into culture war issues. But the fact is that the only way that they can get anybody on their side is to do exactly that, to turn these things into culture wars.
I think the American people are getting tired of having to square up over everything. It's just like we all wanted our schools back open, and part of that, until vaccines were readily available for children, was masking. And in January, our masking requirement, and here in Pennsylvania, I'm only speaking of Pennsylvania, is going to become selective based on what the school district and the local leaders ultimately decided. And for sure, there are going to be some school districts across Pennsylvania that are going to decline to make masking mandatory. But as long as the vaccinations are an option for children, and we continue to push for the solution. I don't understand why that's controversial, and I never have. And whether it's my campaign or whether it's my role as lieutenant governor, it's vaccines. No one wants to go ever, no more lockdowns, no more any of these kind of extremes. And we have an idea of what we're looking at with COVID. But this past Thanksgiving, there were nearly 800,000 empty chairs, across our tables. And this Thanksgiving was so much better than last Thanksgiving because we could all get together. And I just wish people would remember that. And that is because of the vaccines. And that is because our country is on the right path, and we are able to see COVID for what it is. It's something that we need to address and take seriously. And now that we have a vaccine that has proven to be incredibly effective, we shouldn't have anybody on either side. It's not a political issue. It's a medical issue. And I would say, especially coming from a lifetime doctor, a professional like that, I think it's very irresponsible.
Well, now we're nearing the end of Biden's first year in office and basically the beginning of the campaign for midterms. Now, at the same time, we've seen no movement from the Senate on voting rights legislation. What's your message to those senators paying more deference to the filibuster than Americans' rights to fair representation?
That's a great question. And I've always said that the Republicans are setting the table in anticipation for 2024. That's their end game. And that is a second term of President Trump. And you look at states, whether it's mine or whether it's Arizona or Georgia, especially Georgia, Wisconsin, and these other states, that the right to vote is being suppressed. It's being curtailed. It's being shaved off. In my own state, they are going to attempt to pass a constitutional amendment, making sure that universal voting ID for every time you vote, not just when you sign up to vote, but every time you vote, because they understand that at any given time, there's tens of thousands of Pennsylvanians who typically are on the poorer side and are people of color that are less likely to have their ID at any one given time. They understand that could shave up to anywhere between 70 to 90,000 votes. Or at least based on the statistic that were calculated in 2012, the last time they wanted to make universal voting ID. So, and if you look at how small the margins were in 2020, my state, it was 80,000 votes, Arizona, Wisconsin, Georgia, all 45,000 votes between those three states. It's a very insidious and effective strategy that they're employing. And more than just the voting right suppression legislation, they're also replacing the elected officials and the secretaries of state that stood their ground, on the Republican side, that said, look, I voted for President Trump. I believe in him, but he didn't win this state fair and square. There was no voter fraud. In fact, the hero Republican commissioner in Philadelphia, who got death threats and this horrible outcome for telling the truth in Philadelphia, he's leaving his post and he's taking on a different job. So a lot of the guardrails really got mangled in 2020. I had a front seat to that, and we need to replace them. And in the absence of those guardrails being removed by this legislation or by removing these elected officials that stood tall. Removing the filibuster for the Senate is critical because nothing's more fundamental than free access to the right to vote, and that is being strategically curtailed and suppressed in these states that are crucial to either side if they want to win the presidency. And getting rid of that filibuster should be the priority, and getting these things done, because if not now, when? Given the fact, when are we going to have the presidency, the House, and the Senate all under Karjan? Two things that the Republicans have going for them: they are united and they are ruthless. And I always ask folks in campaign events, who's Merrick Garland? And people are like, well, he's our attorney general. And I'm like, well, who should he be? He should be on the Supreme Court. And that demonstrates and reminds people that just how ruthless they can be. And don't think for a second, if they are ever in a position to run the table, 1, 2, 3, president on down, that they won't get rid of the filibuster, and they'll make all kinds of changes, as Roe now has become.
Exactly.
Right in front. Like this is their, it's all falling into place for them. And right now, like I've said, if not now, when?
Yeah. I mean, we keep treating this like it's like they're just playing chicken. But the fact is that when they have the opportunity to do these things that we would assume are just too insidious for them to even do, well, look, I mean, Roe is right on the verge of being gutted right now. And I mean, there is no
bottom. There is no
right.
bottom. And I've said, it's like, Democrats need to be united and ruthless for working people, for reproductive rights, for voting rights, for basic economic development, and for, like all these things none of this is radical. None of this is anything other than what the overwhelming majority of Americans want. And, whatever the Democratic will of my state is, I want that to be true. And right now in my state, the Republicans are still going ahead with this bizarre database to audit the vote, even though it has nothing to do with anything. And we had 5 cases of voter fraud here in Pennsylvania that were all charged, arrested, convicted. They're all on probation. We've dealt with all of that. They still are the plank has become the platform. Whereas if you don't subscribe to the big lie in 2020, you are no longer considered a viable member of the Republican Party from an electoral standpoint. And we in the Democratic Party need to make sure we appeal to that segment of the electorate, saying, look, you may not agree with us on every issue politically, but we believe in democracy in America, and whatever that is, you didn't see the Democrats in in Virginia say, oh, it was rigged, Youngkin cheated. Like, no, that's a hallmark of us. We're going to tell the truth, whether we like the result or not. But the other side isn't there, and I don't think they're ever going to come back.
Yeah. Well, no, you've been on the campaign trail for a long time. You threw your hat into the ring a long time ago. So you have the benefit of being able to hone your message, while the rest of us have kind of just been running around like chickens with their heads cut off, figuring how to correctly approach 2022. But we can take lessons from the voters of Pennsylvania, especially given how important that state is. So what issue is most salient with Pennsylvanians that you've spoken to?
I think most Pennsylvanians want a sense of stability, normalcy. We don't want to return to the chaos. I think that's what a majority of voters actually want. I really do. And I hear some of the understandable concerns about inflation and things like that are going up. But I also want to remind everybody where we were a year ago for Thanksgiving. Let's say we didn't know if the vaccine was going to be effective. We didn't know how it was going to be distributed in time. Last Thanksgiving, I know I didn't. I hadn't seen my parents all year. And, think about how much better Thanksgiving is this year than it was last year, when you couldn't get together with your loved ones without risking giving them a deadly virus, Yeah. And, the economy is on the upswing. Joe Biden has brought a sense of normalcy and competence to everyday life that was lacking during the pandemic. And the message that we're promoting, whether as a lieutenant governor or as a candidate, is that the Democratic Party has always had the working families, the working parties, Americans' best interests at heart. And if you enjoyed the chaos and you enjoyed all of the noise, then I don't know how anybody could want to return to a time like that. It's strange days. And as far as policies go, whether it's Build Back Better, whether it's the infrastructure plan, all these great investments. I mean, the Biden presidency is going to be transformative, certainly through the remainder of his first term, second term, or throughout. It's going to reverberate for quite a while because, they have been able to get some important legislation passed, but nevertheless, there's still a lot that should get done in the Senate, and we need to, in the United States Senate, Democrats should vote like Democrats. And we should all realize, look, these are unique times in American politics. And if we don't do this now, we are going to be complicit in the kind of changes the Republicans are going to make that will make it that much more difficult to win in both 22 and in 24, because we all know that's where the Republicans' endgame lay.
That's exactly right. Now, I know one of your biggest issues is weed legalization. If this administration doesn't move to reschedule marijuana as a Schedule I drug, do you think that opens the door for Republicans to pounce on what is an easy populist issue?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it was one of my biggest issues, but it's something I care about. I mean, it's an enormous economic leverage force multiplier. It has an enormous criminal justice ramifications, in my state and in states. We know it overwhelmingly impacts communities and people of color, and it just creates a lot of jobs. I mean, it's a win-win. Back in 2020, I said that whichever party picks up that mantle of legalizing marijuana, that's an enormously powerful weapon that could have enormous electoral ramifications. And I think I was proven right. All these states, and then there's other states like Wyoming, even they're working to get a ballot on. I think Democrats need to just realize that this would be a huge thing. And you're right. In my state, they went from calling me a liar, and it's like, oh, he's a stoner. And for the first time ever, a couple months ago, the first time in Pennsylvania's history, a state senator introduced a former U.S. Marshal, I might add, one of the most conservative members of the caucus, his own bill to legalize marijuana in Pennsylvania recreationally, and he called it inevitable. So if the Republicans are quickly wising up, saying, hey, this is an issue that a majority of our constituents want, why not leverage it? And your point is right on. Like, it's going to be there for the taking for one of the parties. And let me tell you, in an era of increasingly divided government and partisanship, legal weed is one of the great uniters. And I hear that from people. I have Trumpers approach me and they like, when are you going to end this bullshit and make it legal? And I'm like, well, it's, Republicans have traditionally stopped it, and it's like, it's a strategic issue for whichever party picks it up. And to your point, it certainly creates an opportunity for Republicans to embrace it and overtake it in some of these areas.
All right, well, let's finish with this. What are you getting Giselle for Christmas?
I'm not sure what I'm going to get Giselle, but for me, this will be a special Christmas because August is still all in on Team Santa, whereas our older two, not so much. But it's nice, and we did a big Christmas parade in Homestead, which is a town close by where we live. So but thank you. Yeah.
Well, enjoy the holidays and keep kicking ass on the campaign trail here. Hey. John Fetterman, thanks so much for coming back on.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Bye-bye.